With the rapid innovation and ever-increasing availability of digital cameras, the ability to record high-quality video has never been easier. But there's something that's missing within the characteristics of digital footage. It's a little too sharp, too clean, too perfect. Progress demands that the next camera have an even higher resolution, the new lenses be even sharper, but we lose something in the pursuit of perfection. Perhaps part of the reason that we love to watch cinematic video is due to the imperfections we've grown to associate with what we see on the screen. Gritty grain that breathes texture into the picture, compressed film that abandons bright highlights and deep dark shadows in favor of a more soft, comfortable look. As photographers and filmmakers, many of us know and appreciate this, but it can sometimes be hard to achieve the cinematic film look using footage from high-end cameras. Until now. This video is going to be a review of a plugin that you may or may not have heard of by now, and if you're into the film look, then this is definitely one you're going to want to check out. Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. Thanks for checking out this video. Recently, a photographer friend of mine on Instagram sent me a DM and asked if I'd heard about this plugin called Dehancer. I hadn't heard of it before, and he said it was a plugin for video and photo editing platforms to make your footage look more like film, and that he uses it for all of his videos to take the digital edge off. Personally, whether it's with my photography or my video projects, I prefer to do all of the editing from scratch. And don't get me wrong, there's absolutely nothing wrong with using LUTs or presets on your videos and photos, but for me, so much of the enjoyment of this whole process comes from the editing itself. And I assumed Dehancer was just a LUT or LUT package, so I never looked into it. Fast forward a couple weeks and I get an email from Dehancer asking if I would like to do an honest video review on their plugin in exchange for a license. And hearing about this plugin again in such a short period of time, I thought this was a good little synchronicity, so I decided to check it out. And it's actually pretty cool. For this video, I'm just going to be showing you guys some of the looks that I created with Dehancer on various footage, and I'll quickly run through the plugin itself so you can get a rough idea of what it looks like and how it works. If you like how it looks and you want to try it out, they do offer a free trial for it, and if you do enjoy it and want to purchase a license, they've given me a 10% off code, which I've linked in the description. Anyways, let's get started. Dehancer is a film emulation plugin that imitates the look and characteristics of cinematic film. They've got a large catalog of film stock emulations to choose from, and even some print emulations like Kodak 2383. And whether you want to use one of the included film stocks or create your own film look from the ground up, you can adjust all of the specific areas using the included tools. Now, if you're looking for something you can just throw on your video and call it a day, Dehancer might not be the thing for you. Dehancer's a lot more in-depth than that, and I think it would perform best if you have a basic understanding of a color grading workflow. I'm not going to get into it because I can make an entire video on that subject, but basically think of Dehancer not so much as a LUT or a preset you throw onto your footage, but more so another tool in the chain of the color grading process. At least it is for video anyways. I haven't tried the plugins for Lightroom or Photoshop. So for our first example here, we're gonna look at this static shot I got of this van. Autumn is in full swing here, so we have these really nice colors, and I figured this would be a great place to start. Before I dive into Dehancer, I just really quickly want to talk about the color workflow first. So typically when I'm color grading, my node tree looks something like this, and I could see if I were to use Dehancer at the end of this chain, I could integrate it into my own grade to get some really cool results just within all the tools in Dehancer. But for the purpose of this video, I kind of just wanted to keep it as simple as possible. So for this grade, I've only got 3 nodes. My first node is just an exposure adjustment. So you can see all I've done here is I've dropped the offset in my primary wheels a bit to get the exposure somewhere a little more workable. Next, from what I've gathered online, Dehancer works best when it's being fed Rec 709 footage. So this next node is just a color space transform to get my footage from my Canon log into Rec 709. Lastly, we have Dehancer itself. I should note here that Dehancer does have an option to input your own camera, color space, and gamut, but my Canon R6 Mark II is still a fairly new camera and it's not in the list yet, so we're just going to use Rec 709. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is the real meat and potatoes of Dehancer, which is their film stocks. If you look in here, they've got dozens and dozens of different film looks. Each of them look really good, I think, some of them better than others, and I haven't used many of these films. in real life shooting when I used to shoot film photography, but the ones that I have used, they actually do look pretty true to form in Dehancer, and I think they've done a really great job on these. They seem like they're a really good place to start the base of your grade from. Next, we're going to look at print. So traditionally with film, printing to a print stock is what you do at the end of the production sequence, and the print is essentially what makes the film displayable. So you've got your standards in here like the Kodak 2383. The Kodak Endura glossy paper is really nice. I find that it adds a really flat, soft look to the image, and playing with these different prints and film stocks in different combinations, you can just get an endless variety of looks just from using these two tools alone. And within the print tool, you've also got your adjustability options. You can change the exposure a bit. You can move your target white, which is essentially the white balance, and so on and so forth. Next, we're going to talk about what is one of the best parts of Dehancer, and that is their film grain tool. I usually put film grain in my footage using DaVinci Resolve's native film grain tool, but I can never get it to look right. I can never get it to look natural. And I'm going to show you right now why Dehancer's film grain tool is so much better than DaVinci Resolve's. So if we go back over to my Resolve grade here, so as you can see, I've added grain with DaVinci Resolve, and we've got this grain just dancing over this digital image, and that's kind of how it looks. And I'm going to show you why it looks like that. So if we zoom in here, and I increase the grain size, watch what happens. You can see it's just an overlay, and it's bringing this overlay closer or further from the screen. And likewise, when I adjust the grain strength, it's either just muddying up this overlay or cleaning it up. So I find that no matter what I do in here with the grain tools, I can never really get it to look natural because it's always just an overlay over top of an image. Whereas if we go back to Dehancer, down to the film grain, watch what happens as I increase the grain size and strength in here. It's not just bringing an overlay towards us or further from us, and with the amount, it's actually changing the image itself. It's almost like Dehancer somehow integrates the grain into the footage. So as you increase the grain amount, you're losing detail, you're losing sharpness, you're losing contrast, which is what you would see typically with a heavily grainy image like this. And I think this just lends itself to allowing you to create such a natural, real looking film grain with this tool. You can also adjust your grain across the shadows, midtones, and highlights individually, which I find really useful for getting the grain right where you want it. And another really cool thing about this tool is this film resolution slider. So typically with film, your footage isn't going to be super sharp, it's not going to look really surgical, and depending on the age of it, it's going to have a much softer look. And essentially what this film resolution slider is doing is it's changing the perceived resolution of the footage. So if we crank it up here, you can see she looks really sharp. It's still fairly grainy, and it doesn't look ultra digital, but it's pretty sharp and pretty clean for how messy our grain and our film damage is. So if we bring this all the way down, you can see how much that changes the image itself, and you end up with this really vintage, soft looking footage. Next, we're going to talk about one of my favorite features in Dehancer, and that is bloom. Bloom is essentially this cloudy white haze you can see as I turn it off and on here, over the highlights, and it just kind of diffuses the sharpness and adds a bit of that nice glow that you sometimes see. And you can see that if I turn bloom off, I've actually got a lot of blooming going on, especially up in these specular highlights here. This is because I had a Pro Mist filter on my lens, and I kind of overdid it. It's too strong of a filter for the look I was going for, but it kind of worked out anyways. It's got this nice soft dreamy look. But I really like the idea of bloom being in here because this means that I don't have to pack along a Pro Mist filter with me everywhere I go, because I can just add it in post. And this way I also have a lot more control over that blooming. Whereas with a filter, you're just limited to the amount of bloom that's happening. Here we can adjust the individual parameters on their own. We're just gonna hop back to our van shot here and talk about what's next to film grain, probably the most identifying characteristic of film, and that is halation. Halation is essentially this red bleed that you get between the highlights and shadows where the two meet. It's a big buzzword right now, and everybody seems to be adding halation to their footage, and Dehancer's halation tool is, again, really great. You have a lot of control over the halation itself. You can change the hue of it so you get a more classic red halation, or bring it up orange so it's a little more natural looking, which is what I like. Local diffusion is how much it emanates from the highlights. Global diffusion is how much it pushes into the shadows, and I think less is more with this. You want to be careful, especially if you have a subject like a person in screen. You can easily push it into the skin tones and just change the look of everything. I think it looks a little better just up in the highlights, especially in the specular highlights like that. Next, we're going to talk about film damage. Film damage is this dust and scratches and hairs that you see dancing across the screen, and it's really reminiscent of watching movies in a theater. Once again, as with everything in Dehancer, you have a lot of control over it. You can change the amount of dust, hairs, scratches on their own, the period that they appear, and so on and so forth. It's also got presets in here if you don't feel like doing any of that and you just want to slap one on real quick. So gate weave basically refers to the mechanical swinging of a film strip while it's being pulled through a frame window in a film camera, a projector, or a video encoding device. Think of the movies you used to watch from the 80s or even the early 90s where they would display a title or text on the screen at the beginning and the words are kind of jumping all around and sort of jittering. That's gate weave. And within our gate weave tools, we've got our presets, and we've also got the ability to customize how much it's moving on the x-axis, the y-axis. Period is the frequency that it's going to be jumping. And I think in combination with the film damage, like I said, it just adds a lot to that really classic filmic look. We've also got vignette in here, which I'm not really going to talk about. Vignette, you all know what that is. It's just a darkening of the corners of the image or brightening of the corners of the image, depending which way you move it. You can adjust the feather, you can adjust the size, pretty straightforward stuff. Monitor is pretty cool because you've got a false color option, which essentially works the same as false color in your camera or in your camera monitor, basically just allowing you to make sure you've got your exposure right. Output allows you to adjust the total amount of all of your Dehancer settings globally. I don't really know why you would want to use this because it seems like you wouldn't want to increase or decrease the amounts of all of these things in tandem. Like you would want to adjust them individually. Maybe there's another use for output that I'm not sure about. The LUT generator is pretty cool because you can generate a LUT that you can add to the other footage in your project. But what's really cool is that you can get a look, export that LUT, and then use it with your camera monitor if you have one to get a better idea of what the final outlook of what your footage is going to look like after it's graded while you're shooting. Color head up here is pretty straightforward. You can just adjust the colors in your shadows, midtones, and highlights, the tint, the hue, all of that good stuff. Pretty straightforward. Then we've got film compression, which is essentially traditional film isn't going to have really bright highlights and really deep dark shadows. Let me turn my parade up here. It's going to be compressed. So if you watch this, I turn this on and off. You can see in the background in the highlights here and down here in my scopes, it's bringing these highlights down so that they're closer to the shadows, and what you get is a more soft, comfortable look. You can adjust the tonal range, which is basically how far it's going to be pushing these highlights down into the midtones. You can adjust the white point, which is essentially how much the highlights are going to be affected, and so on. Overall, from me, Dehancer gets a big thumbs up. There's so much adjustability within all of the tools that I could see just playing with this for hours and hours, and you could create virtually an endless variety of film looks. The film stocks and prints all look really good and serve as a great foundation to build your grade on. And all of the film stocks and prints aside, even just the film grain tool alone is enough to make me hooked, and I can honestly say I'm never going to be using DaVinci's film grain tool again because Dehancer's just looks so much better. It's so nice being able to get the film grain to actually look like it's part of the footage and not feel like it's just an overlay that's been done in post. Maybe I've been doing my grain wrong in DaVinci all this time, but with Dehancer, it was just so easy and intuitive. I'm curious now about the Lightroom and Photoshop plugins because I also have a tough time getting the grain to look right in Lightroom. And it would also be really cool to have bloom in Lightroom because it would mean I wouldn't have to carry my Pro Mist filters with me everywhere I go, and I can just add it in post. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thanks for checking it out. Like I said before, if you want to try out Dehancer, they do offer a free trial, and if you do want to buy it, you can use the code Levi10 for 10% off. I hope you all have a great day, and as always, keep on creating. I'll see you next time. Hard cut.